Hi, I'm Connor Jones.
I'm Micah Tomasella.
And this is Culture Brief, a Dennis-informed podcast where we navigate the constant stream of top stories in news, politics, sports, pop culture, and technology. And we're doing it all from a Christian perspective. And Micah, we just got to start off the top right now and just say congratulations to Rory McIlroy for winning the greatest Masters comeback of all time. One of the best Sundays, final rounds of golf anybody has ever seen. And even if you're not a golf fan, you probably saw the images of Rory collapsing on the ground as he finally won this big tournament that he has longed for so many years. Got the career Grand Slam. We just love a day of golf like that, man. It was perfect.
Yeah, it was great. It was wonderful. We'll be diving into that a little bit later in the show. Guys, thanks for joining us today for another episode of Culture Brief. Here's a few things that we're going to go over. So we're going to talk about Gen Z's commitment to Jesus reaches decade-level high. Yes, I said that. Some good news on that front I'm excited to talk about. We're going to talk about Trump policy fights, the JFK files, some updates as well, and then U.S Iran talks, some updates on that, and so much more. So, Connor, let's jump into the brief.
The brief.
All right. So let's talk about Gen Z's commitment to Jesus, and really it can be framed up in curiosity and openness. There's a lot to dive into here, so let's get into it. So recent studies present a complex picture, and when I say complex, I mean it. A complex picture of Generation Z's relationship with faith. While traditional religious affiliation and church attendance have declined, there's a notable and exciting trend of openness to spirituality and a yearning for authentic community. And so these numbers that I'm going to dive into is it's not spirituality in the sense of, anything or everything spiritual and Mother Earth and this religion and that religion. There is a specific openness to Jesus in these times, and it's really interesting. So let's talk about it. So first of all, let's talk about spiritual curiosity amid declining affiliation. Let's talk about that kind of juxtaposition. So Barna's research. Barna is a wonderful research group, does a lot of Christian research specifically around the world here in the U.S., and their numbers are typically spot on. And, sometimes you see those polls or what Barna puts out, and I feel like the last several years I almost kind of get discouraged when I read what they put out of just how this is declining, this is declining, this is declining. But this is a big study that they did, and it was exciting, and so I'm excited to talk about it. So Barna's research indicates that 77% of U.S. teens are at least somewhat motivated to learn more about Jesus specifically, with 52% of them being very motivated to learn about Jesus. However, only 32% are categorized as committed Christians, and 33% are categorized as nominal Christians. This suggests a gap between interest in Jesus and a personal commitment to Jesus among Gen Z. So there's that foundation being built, there's that curiosity, there's that groundswell, that momentum that's starting, maybe the pendulum that's starting to swing, hasn't swung totally yet, as those numbers indicate. But despite this interest, this is kind of the juxtaposition, church attendance remains low. Only 28% of Gen Z Americans attend religious services at least once a month, and a mere 13% attend weekly. This decline is attributed to factors such as minimal exposure to church during their upbringing and the impact of COVID-19 pandemic. And obviously, as teens, parents have a tremendous impact on their kids and their faith. What happens more at home, what happens at home is more important than what happens within the church walls. But Connor, before we kind of dive even more into this, initially, what are your thoughts on this when you hear this?
Yeah, I think it's awesome. We need a resurgence of the Bible, of truth, of church attendance in this nation, but also in the world. We've seen that decline in the last 20 years. Millennials declined big time, and then after that, Gen Z declined. I'm really encouraged by this. Mike, back in 2023, I actually wrote an article for Dennis Inform about Gen Z. And the title was literally, "Is Gen Z a lost cause for the church?" Because at that time, the studies were showing that Gen Z was really checking out. They were not about church. They were not about anything with Christianity. They were, like you said, all about spiritual discovery. They wanted to find something deeper. They wanted to find some sort of meaning. And so a lot of them turned to any religion, but also like astrology and mysticism type stuff. And manifesting is a big one. That is a very dangerous concept. The idea of just being able to manifest whatever you want. But what's cool is seeing that a lot of them are now starting to turn in this way towards Christ. I think it's a big cultural shift. I've seen over the last year and a half, maybe 2 years, a lot of kind of like, I don't want to say church is becoming trendy again. That's not the way I'm trying to say this, but there is something about it that like people are like, hey, we should check this out. There's actually not that bad of a situation at the church. It's not just, whatever your preconceived notions are. And you've got artists like Forrest Frank that are big and bringing a whole different style of music and excitement to the Christian movement for a younger generation. I don't know. I'm really, really encouraged by these numbers.
Yeah. Yep. So let's kind of jump into the reasons or kind of the context behind why might this be happening and why the numbers from 2023 look different than in 2025. So mental health challenges and the role of faith in it are a big part of this. So Gen Z faces unprecedented levels of anxiety and depression. The CDC reports that persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness among teens nearly doubled from 26% in 2009 to 44% in 2021. Contributing factors include, and I think this is a big part of it, man, excessive social media use, which leads to reduced in-person social interactions, and then overprotective parents play a part in this as well. The more time you spend on your phone, you get stuck in those algorithms of social media, and whatever that algorithm is pushing you to that one side, telling you the other side is the enemy, that everybody's this and that everybody's that. And I mean, everybody kind of falls into it, whatever generation you're in, of the more time that you spend in front of a screen and just not outside with your neighbors, it's not a good thing. And you start to develop a fear for other people or other opinions, and it's reckless. I mean, it causes a lot of issues. So engagement with Scripture appears to mitigate some of these challenges, though, according to these studies. So the American Bible Society found that Gen Z individuals who regularly read and apply the Bible experience half the anxiety levels of their peers. This underscores the potential of faith practices in promoting mental well-being. So this is real concrete data that when God's word is actually applied to these young people's lives, their anxiety levels, their mental health levels are at a much better level than those who are not applying God's truth, which makes sense to us, right?
It does.
It's always good to hear numbers back up what we know to be true.
Well, we know that Gen Z is being noted as this generation that has so many mental health problems. They're, like you said, they're depressed, they're anxious, they're all these different things, and they just don't know where to turn to for that. How do you get help?
Yeah.
And as this data is showing, the Bible is just massive piece in finding help and finding healing in mental health. And so seeing this, and hopefully that is just something that continues to spread that information. People are like, hey, I was healed by talking to God and going to his truth.
Yep. You know, we've talked about this concept a lot of when you have the world at your fingertips, all of the world's issues just by scrolling. I mean, that is tough for anybody to bear, but especially in such a developmental time as you're coming into your own, going through puberty, trying to figure out what you want to do with your life, just the pressures, the social pressures on top of they have the world at their fingertips. I mean, you and I have the world at our fingertips, but hopefully we're more mature and equipped to kind of handle it and shut it off and shut it down and compartmentalize and bring it to God. But when you're growing up, that's difficult, right? That's a difficult place to be. So let's talk about, to a certain extent, a resurgence in church attendance, maybe not here in the U.S., but in Europe. So let's talk about that. So contrary to the narrative of decline, there's evidence of a quiet revival among young people in certain regions. In England and in Wales, church attendance among 18 to 24-year-olds has increased from 4% in 2018 to, get this, 4 times as much, 16% in 2024. This resurgence is attributed to a desire for a community and the influence of family members, such as, grandparents or those who are helping younger people with their faith formation. Young adults are not only attending church, but also engaging in prayer, Bible reading, and faith-based social activism, as you would call it. This trend suggests a shift towards a more holistic and more of a community-oriented expression of faith. So we're starting to see church attendance uptick in places like Europe, like England and Wales, where maybe we're not seeing that church attendance uptick quite as much here in the U.S. yet, but I'm trying to kind of give more of a worldwide view of this. And then, let's talk about community and the role of community, authentic community in the groundswell that we're seeing. Barna did a study called Making Space for community. It was a report, and they highlight that 57% of Gen Z and millennials prioritize building strong relationships at church over hearing thought-provoking sermons. So they're over half are prioritizing that over going on Sunday and hearing the thought-provoking sermon, which is a great thing. It's just here's what they're focused on. This preference indicates a desire for authentic community, like I talked about, authentic connections, supportive community. Churches that offer relational discipleship, health, mental health support, not just ignoring that, but actually diving deep into that, and flexible engagement opportunities are more likely to resonate with Gen Z. So utilizing platforms like Instagram and YouTube for their interactive content, churches that are doing that also are able to facilitate some meaningful connections there. And here's kind of my conclusion of these numbers as I kind of wrap this up. Gen Z definitely brings some challenges to the table. They're growing up with a lot, like we said, lots of struggles. But there's also real opportunity here. If the church is willing to rethink this, if they're willing to build genuine community, supporting those who are struggling with anxiety and depression, and they're focusing on authentic relational discipleship, that's going to make a big difference. This generation is clearly hurting, but they're open and they're hungry. Their curiosity and hunger for meaning shows that now's the time to step up, fellow Christian church. There's potential for growth and even revival if we meet them where they are. This is pretty exciting. So Gen Z may seem distant with trends and technologies that feel out of reach for some people, maybe who are in older generations. Connor, you and I are on the tail end of the millennial generation, so these things don't seem so distant to us, but for our listeners who are in older generations. But faithfulness in your current spheres, whether family, work, or community, it still matters. God has placed you where you are for a reason. In the church you are, in the neighborhood you are, in the home you are, your presence, integrity, and authenticity can have a profound impact. You don't need to be on every social media platform to have an impact or to influence this generation. You just need to show up, and you need to be real, be present. And another suggestion I would have is just don't be in such a hurry that you miss people who are hurting in your life, so scheduled that you miss an opportunity that God might have right in front of you to touch someone's lives, to just be an encouragement to them and to point them to Jesus. Your life can be a testimony to God's faithfulness, fellow believer. You just have to be willing and you have to be ready. So if you are a committed follower of Jesus Christ, you can play a crucial role in mentoring and discipling Gen Z by offering guidance, by offering wisdom, by offering support. Be faithful where you are and let God use your presence to plant seeds for this revival that the foundation of is swelling up. These numbers back that up. There's something happening here. The pendulum is swinging in a different direction. So let's be ready for that. And I just want to leave us, Connor, with the words of Jesus. Either way, no matter what the trends say, good or bad, right? We need to look at what Jesus says here and remember to be faithful exactly where God's planted us, no matter what the numbers say. Let me bring you back to the first and second greatest commandments. Matthew 22, verses 34 through 39. But when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together, and one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law? And he said to them, you shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your mind. This is the first and the greatest commandment. And a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself.
That's good. Yeah, Gen Z, if you're listening to this and you're in Gen Z, just be encouraged by this. Your peers are seeking something out, and you have the chance to, disciple them in a way. If you feel you are strong enough in your faith to do that, you can plant seeds, you can talk to them. And if you're older, this is a great just reminder, man, they need some guidance. Share your wisdom, share your faith, share your testimony. Love that. Thank you for this encouraging story, Micah. That was just really, I'm coming away. I'm blown away by these numbers, especially when you look at England, which is so known as an unchurched nation in the Western Hemisphere. And they're not in the Western Hemisphere, but they're in the West. And so seeing those numbers that they have grown significantly in Gen Z, quadrupled in percentage of attendance at church, I'm just blown away by that.
It's crazy.
So cool. God's
doing
big things.
No matter
what
how
a chance
old
for
you
revival.
are, no matter what generation you're in, you can play a part in this.
Absolutely.
There's a part, there's a role that God has for you. You just got to step out in faith.
Well, Michael, let's dive into some Trump stuff, tariff stuff, policy
Talk about
stuff, the stuff that just makes the news every day and keeps people thinking, what in the world is going on? And honestly, it keeps us on our toes, because even last week, we spent a good chunk of our podcast talking about all the tariff stuff that was happening last week. All the confusion, who's getting tariff this, who's getting tariff that. And by the end of our recording, we were like, man, we'll just see what happens. And an hour after we recorded, Trump removed all the tariffs that we had just talked about. So it is just a constant
90-day pause. Story. Yeah.
I mean, he gave a 90-day pause on the tariffs to most of the countries in the world, and kept a 10% baseline on all of those countries, but removed the big tariffs, which helped stabilize the stock market, which is good. But he did continue to tariff China. In fact, he upped the tariff. I think when we ended the podcast last week, it was at 104%. It's now 145% tariff on any goods coming from China.
Boom.
Actually, not any goods. Yeah, we're just continuing to raise the tariff.
Right, there's exceptions.
There's exceptions, so we'll hit on that real fast. So, yeah, that tariff increased from 84% to 125% to now 145%. And then I saw this morning the Trump administration is considering a 245% tariff on Chinese goods. So, I don't know, man. We'll just see. That's a big tariff. So, China's not so happy about that. So, how have they responded? Here's what they're doing. China increased their own tariffs on U.S. goods from 84% to 125%. Then they also announced all orders of Boeing aircraft, which are all made in America, are going to be suspended for 2 years at least. That affects 129 aircraft orders. That may not seem like a big deal, but that is billions of dollars worth of American manufacturing. Yeah. And Boeing's obviously already in their own situation with a lot of headaches and financial headaches, but that's going to impact a lot of jobs and suppliers and all of that. And that's a big setback. They've also halted exports of some rare earth minerals and magnets that are crucial to the U.S. production of cell phones and electric vehicles, fighter jets, a bunch of technological advancements there. So they're firing back. I think, Micah, this indicates that we truly are in an all-out trade war with China.
Totally.
So great. I don't even know what to feel about this. It's just always something. So what does this mean for the economy? What does this matter more for China? Does this matter more for the U.S.? Here's what I can say. The total goods exported from the U.S. to China equals about $147 billion. That's typically made up of oil seeds and grains, mineral fuels, other types of oils, nuclear reactors, machinery, and services such as like education, travel services, intellectual property, all of that. So $147 billion is what the U.S. exports to China. That's what can be tariffed. On the reverse, China exports $501 billion worth of exports to the U.S.
Which is the trade deficit that we hear about a lot. I mean, that's the trade deficit on display, more than more than 3 times, right?
So that trade deficit technically equals $353 billion.
Yeah.
So this probably impacts China significantly more. It's going to impact the U.S. It's going to impact our farmers and our manufacturing, and it's going to cause problems long term. But yeah, China may have more to lose here, but they're also standing pretty strong. So yeah, because China, they export a bunch of electronics, machinery, furniture, building supplies, toys, sporting goods, all of that. And so the way that they're going to try to get around this, one thing that they're exploring over in China is what's called a gray channel, which is a way to circumvent the U.S. tariffs by rerouting goods through other countries with lower tariff rates. So let's say they want to reroute through like Indonesia. Yep. Well, then, their companies ship it to Indonesia where they're not going to have nearly that type of tariff. And then Indonesia ships it on their behalf, right?
Which is why that's a big part of why Xi is like visiting those Southeastern Asian countries right now, right?
Yeah, he's on a little tour trying to build up a little
alliance.
Trade channel. Yeah, alliance with like Thailand and Vietnam and Laos and stuff. So I don't know. We'll see what he does there and what China fully does, but they've got other options. They can get around this, I think. So yeah, they're trying to strengthen those relationships. And here's the thing. Here's what Trump says is the leverage. It's what we already mentioned. Yeah. That there's a $353 billion deficit. The Chinese import way more to the U.S. than we do to China. So, Trump's dialed back some of these tariffs. The Trump administration announced that they are going to have exclusions that include smartphones, laptops, hard drives, computer processors, servers, memory chips, semiconductor manufacturing equipment, and a bunch of other electronics.
Yep.
Those are not going to get that 145% tariff anymore.
Which
that
is
makes up like 40%.
Which is the main stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're still going to be tariffed 145%. Those things are going to be tariffed at 20%. So we'll just, see how much that impacts pricing here in America, how that impacts pricing across Apple and Dell and any other big products that are made and manufactured in China. Lots of back and forth. Lots of implementation, then exemptions and exceptions. It's kind of confusing. It's hard to keep up. Every day it's something new. And what's interesting is on Sunday, Trump said there was no tariff exception announced on Friday. These products are subject to the existing 20% fentanyl tariffs, and they are just moving to a different tariff bucket. That's the way he's trying to classify this big change of having exclusions. I like what Axios noted. They said that Trump's erratic real-time tariff tweaking has confused investors, deflated the dollar, and shaken the stock market. Investors in the nation's financial system crave stability and predictability, the opposite of what Trump's delivering. So yeah, the confusion is of course affecting the markets. And then, Wall Street Journal, they said, so what happened and what's the real policy? Who knows? That's literally what they said in their article. And Politico had an article that they titled "Tariff Carve-Outs Underscore Weak U.S. Position in the China Trade War." And that to some in the White House, the exceptions are indicative of the relatively weak position the administration is in as it wages a trade war with China, which has spent years making preparations for an escalation with the U.S. on trade. The carve-outs also reveal the conundrum facing the administration. The U.S. is imposing new tariffs on Chinese goods in an attempt to move manufacturing back to the U.S., but those tariffs are particularly painful for U.S. manufacturers because they are currently so dependent on Chinese parts. Micah, what are your thoughts? What do you think about all of this?
It's tough because if I'm giving my own personal opinion, it's very clear that China in many ways has taken advantage of the United States and a lot of countries who were in an alliance with, whether it's on trade or on inventions or IPs or intellectual property. So it's clear that there's a problem. I think with a lot of what's happening is we can get frustrated at the unpredictability. I know I do. I can relate to that. But at the same time, nothing's been done about these issues really in a really long time or maybe ever. And so it just depends on what strategy you want to be taken. Do you want this to be a sledgehammer, or do you want this to be very precise cuts at the right time with a little bit more strategy? I don't know what moves he makes, what the administration makes, and what they've actually planned out, and they're trying to make it appear a certain way as opposed to just off-the-cuff decision-making. I do think it's kind of a balance of both, because the Trump administration is trying to keep China, specifically in some of the world, on their toes. But, at the same time, depending on who you read and how you read it, this is a great idea, or this is not such a great idea. For example, the Wall Street Journal, specifically Politico, are pretty left-leaning, and so they're not going to like this, right? And so, but at the same time, I think what happened last week, these decisions with the tariffs, there was a 90-day pause after the bond market went crazy and after the stock market was crashing. Kind of crashing for a few days.
It crashed.
Yeah. Trump listened to the smart people in his cabinet, like Scott Bessent, for example, and said, okay, we're going to do a pause, right? So all the people who were asserting that this whole thing was like 4D chess and that he baited China, well, I mean, we've just got to see. I don't think it's that, because Trump listened to just what he says himself. Hey, was planning this. Everybody freaked out. Okay, I'm going to do these 90-day pauses. We're going to get these deals in place. I don't think it's 4D chess. I think it's Trump has an agenda. The administration has an agenda. It wasn't working out the way they'd hoped, so they changed course. That's not a bad thing, to listen to smart people, to look at the market, and to change course. That's not a bad thing. So this is hard to navigate. I mean, even as I'm kind of explaining this, there's two sides to this, and I find myself visiting both sides pretty frequently.
Yeah, it's just interesting. I do wonder if there was a better way to roll all this out and it wouldn't have been so chaotic.
That's the thing. For sure. I think for sure on that one.
We're approaching 100 days of Trump's presidency, And in that 100 days, I mean, I'm not sure any other president has done anything remotely close to the number of changes and executive orders and all of that as Trump has. And it's been what people voted him, they voted him in for.
Yes.
And he's getting things done. But when you go so fast, you may, and we talked about this with Doge specifically a few weeks ago, they were making cuts almost too rapidly, having to rehire people that they were firing and laying off. And so when you move too fast, it can get sloppy. So maybe they just need to slow down and be a little more precise, like you were saying, as opposed to just taking a sledgehammer and everything.
Yeah. Next week when we talk about this, something totally is going to be different, you know?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Maybe the trade war in China got way worse, or maybe we have an agreement in place. Like, I think both are just as likely. So we'll talk about it next week.
Micah, it could happen in the next few hours like it did last week. You know,
no doubt.
Everything is just moving so fast.
That's why everybody's just got to calm down about this stuff. Like, all of these rising prices, look, these tariffs are just now going into effect. We've just got to see what happens and how it plays out. This is a lot of what if. This is a lot of fear talking. And I know it's scary. I'm not saying that it's not. But we've also got to trust God and then give it time to actually play out first before stamping it as this or that, or before saying the world's ending or this is going to crash the economy. Let's just give it a second.
Yeah, totally agree. Something else that Trump's been in a fight about is the higher education and some of these Ivy League elite universities. He's been trying to pressure Harvard and Columbia. And so just real fast on kind of what's going on there. So the New York Times reported that Trump finished lunch in the private dining room outside of the Oval Office on April 1.
This. Oh my!
And then he floated the proposal: what if the government simply canceled every dollar of the nearly $9 billion promised to Harvard University? The administration's campaign to expunge woke ideology from college campuses has already forced Columbia to strike a deal. And Trump then said, what if we never pay them, talking about Harvard? And he casually asked, wouldn't that be cool? So he's got his sights on Harvard now, and they're in their own little battle. So the White House did end up sending a letter to Harvard, which is America's oldest university, also America's wealthiest university, and demanded that they change their hiring, admissions, and teaching practices, which they say will help fight anti-Semitism on campus. This all stems from last spring when there was a bunch of pro-Palestinian protests and lockouts and taking over buildings on these Ivy League campuses. And
Jewish people not feeling safe, truly.
Jewish students, feeling like they were in danger.
Jewish professors were not given the support they needed. I mean, this is
it was pretty bad.
Been very cataloged,
And so that's how the White House is approaching this, is saying we're trying to make these campuses safer. You guys did not do that. The presidents of these Ivy League universities went before Congress and did testimonials and testified that they did what they could or whatnot, and a lot of them had to step down or resign, including the president of Harvard. She ended up resigning over plagiarism issues, but I mean, really, it was because this all happened at the same time, right?
Yeah.
So they sent that letter, and they said that they need to change their practices, including reporting students to the federal government who are, quote, hostile to American values. What does that mean? I think that's a big question mark. And that they're ensuring each academic department is viewpoint diverse, not just only having what they would consider liberal or pro-Palestinian views. And then hiring an external government-approved party to audit programs and departments that most fuel anti-Semitic harassment. And of course, because of the whole plagiarism thing with the former president, they also said that they need to check faculty staff for plagiarism. Okay.
Fair enough.
So Columbia, they caved. They struck a deal with...
They caved.
Yeah. They struck a deal with the administration. I'm not even saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying that they...
No. That's just such a hot word right now. Caved. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway. Well, and a lot of people would say that big law firms are caving to Trump, and CEOs of tech companies are caving to Trump. That's the word that's being used. So that's kind of... I probably use that word because I've just been reading it all day, every day, of different people meeting with Trump and striking deals with him is the way that the White House would say it, right? So as opposed to Columbia, who did make a deal to try to get back their federal funding, Harvard is going to stand up to the White House, and they're going to pick a fight. And so they wrote back a letter. The university president wrote this letter, and he posted it the other day, and it got a lot of views, especially on Twitter. I think it had like 56 million tweet views. And they said, federal grants have led to groundbreaking innovations across a wide range of medical, engineering, and scientific fields. And these innovations have made countless people in our country and throughout the world healthier and safer. And he's saying that because the Trump administration froze $2.2 billion of federal funding that was going to go to Harvard. They give them $9 billion. And Trump is threatening to freeze that whole thing. That's a lot of money. But Harvard is saying we use that money to better society, basically to improve sciences, right? And research and all of that. So he's saying, you guys look like the bad guys for not giving us the money to do these research. I imagine the White House would say, well, we can send it to other universities. So that would be their rebuttal. And the president of Harvard continued to say, it makes clear that the intention is not to work with us to address anti-Semitism in cooperative and constructive manners. It's just demanding that we do things to combat anti-Semitism with the majority representing direct governmental regulation of the intellectual conditions at Harvard. And he says no government, regardless of which party is in power, should dictate what private universities can teach, whom they can admit and hire, and which areas of study and inquiry they can pursue. And that Harvard will not surrender its independence or relinquish its constitutional rights, saying that the government is unlawfully trying to dictate teaching and operations at Harvard. So, yeah, hours after that letter is when Trump paused the $2.2 billion. And that has sparked a whole debate, especially on social media. And you want to know, Michael, what another president had to say about this? Because I found this pretty interesting.
Sure.
Barack Obama tweeted, Harvard has set an example for other higher ed institutions, rejecting an unlawful and ham-handed attempt to stifle academic freedom, while taking concrete steps to make sure all students at Harvard can benefit from an environment of intellectual inquiry, rigorous debate, and mutual respect. Let's hope other institutions follow suit. So yeah, you get the left side of this argument really standing behind Harvard and saying that they're doing the right thing, standing up to what they would say is an overreaching government who is just trying to punish a university for not having the same ideals as them. Whereas the White House is saying, we're doing this because you guys are not protecting students, particularly Jewish students, from dangers on your campus. So a lot to take in there. This is not something that impacts tons of people. You know, this is going to be definitely
I mean, it sets a precedent, though. I think that's right. The thing. It's like, if it can happen here, it can happen other places. And then you think about, you know, if Trump can do this, well, then what if somebody else comes into power and takes these steps against institutions that president might not agree with? I mean, it sets a precedent. What's so interesting about a lot of these things is it is not so simple, because clearly there's an issue at Harvard and a lot of these heavily government subsidized universities where it is producing the type of person that thinks one way,
yeah, and
no other way is welcome. You know what I mean? Like intellectual debate, mutual respect. I think that there's been a ton of studies, a lot of things that have come out, but like we've seen doesn't really seem to be happening consistently from a place like Harvard or maybe even like Columbia. And then anti-Semitism has clearly been an issue there. So you want to address these things, but how do you address these things? What is too far? But then every other attempt in the past hasn't really worked. So how far is too far? What is the right thing to do? This is another subject that it is hard to just land on. This is exactly the right way.
It definitely is. Yeah. There's what's the middle ground? Who's in the right?
Yeah.
Who's in the wrong? Probably both sides to an extent, right?
Yeah.
The one thing that I will say that it kind of, I think we should mention here is yesterday, we're recording on Wednesday, Tuesday, Trump posted on Truth Social that he should remove their tax exempt status at Harvard. That is a slippery slope. If you start to just use tax exempt statuses as a threat and some way to punish institutions that you don't agree with, that's kind of like you just said. It could set a really bad precedent, and that could end up turning in the future on, for instance, Christian ministries, other faith-based institutions, any institution, schools, universities, whatever it is that is a nonprofit and has tax exemptions. If somebody doesn't like them, they could take that tax exempt status away, and it could cripple them financially. The thing with Harvard is they have a $53 billion endowment, so they're not in trouble here, right? They're totally fine. And that's what puts them in the position to be able to have this argument with the White House. So I'm not worried about them. It's more so about what's the cultural impact of this one thing, and is there going to be judges that come in and make?
Yeah, I'm not worried about Harvard. Sorry.
I'm not either. I mean, the only people that worry about Harvard that I know of are Louis Litt and Harvey Specter. They care.
That's right.
I do not
of course they
care tons about Harvard, but it is interesting. Beautiful campus, though. I've been there. It's awesome.
Yeah, so have I. Yeah.
So, Micah, it makes me wonder, what would a world without sin look like? Imagine a world with no sin. Obviously, there would be no conflict between nations in trade wars or any sort of violent conflict. There would be no conflict between institutions like the government and a university. There would be no conflict in our own personal relationships. But we do know that the reality is Genesis 6:12 says, "And God saw the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth." But Micah, there is a peace that awaits us in the kingdom of heaven, thankfully. And as John 1:14 says, "And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth." So we should strive to bring that peace to our lives daily, right? Stand up for what's right and just and true to God's word. And don't pick fights that will only cause more pain. Are these fights worth it? Is the fight with China worth it? Is the fight with Harvard worth it? I don't think that's for me to say. I think that's for people to discern and determine on their own. But, on a smaller scale in your own life, what are the fights that are worth it? Is it worth it to cause conflict? So while we might not really be waging a trade or constitutional war, we do have the ability to choose a more peaceful path in our daily life.
Yeah, it's good.
Think about this in your own life. Is your coworker frustrating you? Is a parent or a child frustrating you and making you mad? Is a situation that you're just in this week with someone causing a lot of conflict in your life? What are the better ways to go about conflict resolution than picking a fight? 2 Chronicles 7:14 says, "If my people who are called by my name humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and heal their land." So in regards to trade wars and foundational government disagreements, we should pray for our nation and leaders in terms of finding a better resolution. But we should also do that within our own lives and pray for our hearts as we go about our daily life.
Solid, Connor. Thank you for that. Thanks for taking us through these stories. Okay, well, let's jump into the mailbag here. We got a really interesting Instagram direct message, a DM for short, but we want to continue to hear from all of you. Please send your questions, thoughts, or topic ideas to culturebrief@denisonforum.org. Follow us on Instagram at culturebriefpodcast. So here, Connor, I'll let you kind of take the answer on this one, but here's the DM that we got. She says, "I'm loving this podcast. You guys are killing it. Can you talk more about the JFK files now? And they've been released for a few weeks. Thank you for that, Anna Joy." Connor, tell us what we got on that.
Yeah, it's interesting. We even talked about this when the files are coming out. We were like, oh, this could be the big thing. They dropped 80,000 documents, and since they came out, nothing really seemed to happen. Everyone was like, it felt like a dud, right? That's how it felt. Yeah. So, and it pretty much was, which is a bummer. I mean, I think everybody was looking for that smoking gun answer, who really killed JFK, and we didn't get that, but we did learn a few things. So I'll hit on those real fast. The CIA, as we found out, downplayed to Congress and the public what it actually knew about Lee Harvey Oswald before the assassination. They had been tracking him for a while. They were surveilling him more than previously known. The chief of counterintelligence, James Angleton, he actually had a stack of 180 pages sitting on his desk all about Lee Harvey Oswald the week before he assassinated Kennedy.
Yeah, interesting.
So if anything, we probably learned that the CIA was more aware of Oswald and they were really trying to track him, and they just kind of lost that. They were totally aware that he was a danger to society, and I guess maybe they were even aware that he hated Kennedy. Kennedy, we also learned, had more distrust of the CIA than we previously knew. Everybody knew that he was not in love with the CIA, but these documents did reveal he was pretty distrustful of them, which kind of fuels the theory that maybe the CIA was behind his assassination. And then Jefferson Morley, a Washington Post reporter who runs the JFK Facts blog, said, "So what this story raises is this question. Was the CIA incredibly atrociously incompetent when it comes to the Lee Harvey Oswald assassination attempt, or not attempt, but reality? Or was the CIA actually running an operation involving Oswald?" While we don't have the answer to that question, there are still some relevant records to come out. For example, one file of another CIA officer who was involved in the pre-assassination surveillance of Oswald is still kept secret. So maybe there's some more out there that we need to find. But thanks for the question, Anna Joy. There's still lots of questions to be answered. Ultimately, we didn't learn tons, but we learned that maybe the CIA wasn't as competent as we thought.
Yeah, we'll definitely keep you guys in the loop as we learn more. You know what this reminds me of? It kind of reminds me of the Trump assassination attempt. It just kind of seemed like gross negligence, lack of planning. You know, all this stuff about this one guy. So if the CIA isn't behind it, knew so much about him, but wasn't aware of where he was and how he was able to pull off that shot, you know, it just kind of reminds me of the Trump administration and kind of, you know, not the Trump administration, but what happened with Trump. Okay, so let's jump into the Masters poll. So Connor, you gave a spicy hot take last week where you said if you haven't been to the Masters, you shouldn't be able to wear the Masters gear. So here's kind of some of the poll results that we saw. And Connor, you can kind of give more context to this. So the question was, should you wear Masters apparel if you've ever been? We posted this on X, on Instagram, on Spotify, different places. And to clarify, we do know that you can purchase Masters gear. Actually, to clarify, Connor knows that you can purchase Masters gear secondhand, but it is wildly more expensive than if you purchase it there, and the products are more limited if you don't purchase it there. So on X, a guy, Mizuno MP60 guy, he said to Connor's take, "This is, without a doubt, the dumbest thing I've ever heard."
Yeah, I got a lot of heat for this one in comments and people reaching out to me. They're like, "What are you talking about?" And then a lot of people were like, "You do know you can buy it online, right?" I'm like, "Yes, I know you can buy it online." But in the clip that we posted on socials, that part was not included. It just was me saying it's so exclusive you can only buy it at the Masters, which technically is true. If you want the official stuff and you want it at the right price, they intend for you to buy it there. Yes, of course you can buy anything online. I'm not stupid. But people think I am, and that's fine. I think it was funny to read all these responses. And I will also say that in the polls, I feel a little vindicated because on Instagram, 43% of people said that, yeah, you can wear stuff if you've not been to the Masters, but 57% said no, you should not. And so that makes me feel good. And then on Spotify, it was a 50-50 tie. You know, half the people think that you should wear Masters stuff if you've not been, and half of them don't. I did like one comment we got on Spotify. Josh, he said, "I wholeheartedly agree with Connor's hot take." Thank you, Josh. I'll take it a step further, though. If you wear any band apparel, you better listen to that band or artist. More respect if you've seen them live. I actually fully agree with that. You know, people like to fashionably wear like Rolling Stones or Guns N' Roses or Def Leppard shirts. And I'm like, if you're wearing that, I better be able to ask you what your favorite song is by that band. If you don't know, AC/DC is another one.
You should be able to list like 5
I feel like
songs,
if you're wearing a shirt,
like,
you should be able to really list some stuff.
Yeah, give me some deep tracks. You know what I mean? Like, not just Paradise City. You know what I mean? Or something like that. So, okay, cool. All right, well, so let's jump into our check-in section real quick. So the Masters. Rory McIlroy won the 2025 Masters tournament this past weekend, completing the Grand Slam, joining legends like Tiger and Jack Nicklaus. He secured the victory in a sudden death over Justin Rose. It's beautiful to watch. After both finished 11 under par, Rory missed his putt on the 18th that would have put him 12 under and he would have won and avoided the playoffs, right? So everybody was like, oh no, it's happening to Rory all over again. He's melting down. He went to the playoff. He won his first Masters win. It's his 5th major title, ending an 11-year pursuit of the green jacket. The final round drew significant attention with an average of 12.7 million viewers, peaking at 19.5 during the playoff. And Dr. Dennison, in one of his most recent daily articles, I think it was on Monday when it came out, he said this was the most emotional round of golf he's ever seen. And that's kind of what you alluded to, Connor, at the beginning of him falling on his face, you know, as he won. Just the most genuine response, kissing his wife, kissing his kid. Just like, hey, after all of these years of hard work and pursuing my dreams, I did it. Everybody loves stories like that. It was beautiful to watch.
I loved it, man. I was sweating bullets for him. I was so nervous for him, and he was so close to blowing it several times. And I was like, Rory, of course he made it as hard as possible, but that almost made the win
pulled it off
more beautiful. I loved it.
Pulled it off.
Just amazing golf. Could talk about it all day. But real fast, I want to also hit on an update that we need to give because we talked several weeks ago about the deportations that the Trump
Yep.
administration is doing, particularly of gang members. They're sending them off to El Salvador prisons. I don't think a lot of people have a problem with that, but where the issue comes in is, what if you misidentify someone and mistakenly send them there? That seems to be what happened with Kilmar Abrego Garcia. We mentioned him previously on an episode. He was sent to this prison in El Salvador, even though he was legally living in Maryland. And it's because he was being accused of being a member of MS-13, a very violent gang. But the administration has said that they mistakenly identified that, and he should not probably have been sent. But they're also saying, no, he was dangerous. It depends on who you ask. Is it the Justice Department or the White House? Anyways, This week, the president of El Salvador, Nayib Bukele, said in a question, well, he came to the White House to meet with Trump, and they talked about all of this, but he was questioned whether he'd return Abrego Garcia to the U.S., and he said, that's preposterous. How can I smuggle a terrorist into the United States? And so, even though the U.S. is saying that they mistakenly sent this guy to El Salvador, and he's now in a very, very brutal prison there, they're not working super hard to bring him back. And the Supreme Court is in on this, and they said that the government must facilitate his return. But the White House is saying, well, he's not our problem anymore. He's in El Salvador. He's El Salvador's problem. And he's an El Salvadorian citizen. So that makes it even more complicated.
Yeah, it's tough. It's a tough one. Because he was here legally, but he wasn't a citizen. And then the Trump administration is saying, like, they'll provide a plane, but they're not necessarily going to send the manpower over to get him out and then make sure he comes back. And then the president of El Salvador, I think that guy's probably just going to do whatever Trump says, right? So he says, hey, I'm not going to send him back. I'm not going to stress out about doing that. So we'll see how this situation plays out. All right, let's get into the Iran negotiations update real quick. U.S. Iran talks, the second round of nuclear talks is set for this Saturday in Rome. So this is the second face-to-face meeting. Again, these are the first direct talks since 2015. There's a uranium dispute. The U.S. wants Iran to move its enriched uranium abroad. Iran, at this point, refuses. There's military tension. The U.S. sent a second aircraft carrier to the region and continued strikes to Iran proxies like the Houthi rebels and stuff like that. I mean, look, the U.S. is just kind of showing force here in the background. And then diplomatic signals, both sides are coming out of those meetings saying that they're satisfactory, that they're working towards something. And then Russia's role is something interesting to take part or to think about in this negotiation. It's unclear if Russia will accept Iran's uranium if a deal is made. So that's the update on those talks right now.
High stakes talks. So we'll see what happens there. One other thing real fast is I want to hit on a couple movies, because we've got the biggest movie of the year so far that I would never have predicted, and it's the Minecraft movie.
Yeah, right.
Not really up my alley, probably not up your alley, Micah, but
no.
It's been very popular, and this is another Gen Z thing, right? Like they grew up on Minecraft. We did not, but they did, and so they've fled to these movie theaters, but they're causing chaos in some of them. There's been a lot of viral trends about going into the movie theaters and just causing absolute chaos during a certain chicken jockey scene. I'm not sure there, but just got to mention that it's made $500 million worldwide and could end up being one of the biggest movies of the year. Juxtaposition to that is a movie called The King of Kings, this is pretty cool. It's an animated movie about the resurrection of Christ. I mean, it's the gospel story essentially, and it's got a bajillion stars in it. I mean, Oscar Isaac is the voice of Jesus. It's got Pierce Bronson and Kenneth Branagh, Uma Thurman, Mark Hamill, and Forrest Whitaker. All that to say, it's made $20 million essentially in the movie theater. $19 million opening weekend. That's big for a faith-based movie. Love this. If you have kids, go take them to see this movie leading into Easter weekend. We've got a review on Denison Forum. We'll link that in the show notes as well.
Okay, so for our tune-in section, Easter weekend, Good Friday coming up, Jesus' death. Sunday is coming, Jesus' resurrection on Sunday. Enjoy that time with your family and use this time. Our encouragement is use this time to reflect on Jesus, his life, and how he gave it up for us on the cross. Sinless, perfect, took on our sin, our shame, and we're so thankful for that. And so this Holy Week, this weekend of Easter is a wonderful time to spend time with family, to spend time at church, recognize and remember Jesus and all that he's done for us and the salvation that he offers to us so freely because of what happened on this weekend over 2,000 years ago.
Yep, and if you're looking for a resource to help you kind of just prep for Easter weekend, Dr. Jim Denison, founder of Denison Forum, he wrote a great Easter devotional. It's going to be out today, Thursday. And you can go to denisonministries.org/Easter. If you're subscribed to our newsletters, it will be sent to you. And you can go explore it. It's called The God Who Feels Your Pain, an Easter meditation on the cross. It's really good stuff. Check that out. Well, hey guys, thanks for joining us on this week's episode of The Culture Brief, a Denison Forum podcast. All the articles that we mentioned, all the videos that we ever mentioned, they're always linked in our show notes. So go check those out if you're looking to read any of our stuff. And please, please, please subscribe, rate, review the show, and share it with a friend. And we will see you next Thursday.
See ya.